All right, so Nintendo released their financial results for this past fiscal year. As we just finished up the fourth quarter for their fiscal year, it usually starts in April and it ends at the end of March. So we just got done their past one, which was their fiscal year 2019, essentially, and we're starting up now their fiscal year 2020. And this past fiscal year, they actually made quite a bit of money. So good on Nintendo there. Obviously, at $10.7 billion was their overall net sales, and their net profit was $1.73 billion, and then their operating income was $2.23 billion, which everything is up completely from last year. So good news there. Now, looking at their dedicated video game sales, interesting here is that the Switch has now passed the Nintendo 64. The Switch sits at 34.74 million units, which you can actually check, which is kind of cool on their entire like setup for investors and everything and information. Very transparent about everything, but you can actually see the Nintendo 64 down here at 32.93 million. So with the new report, yes, they have indeed passed that. I believe the next one would be the Super Nintendo at 49 million, which will be a little bit, but according to their projections for this fiscal year, they're going to have passed that pretty easily by the end of this fiscal year that we're in now, where they're aiming for what seems to be quite a bit, like in the mid 50s is what they're looking for. So interesting there. But yeah, 34.74 now. That is technically less than what a lot of people were expecting, right? I mean, the first quarter is generally, everyone knows, is a bit slower because after the holidays and everything, for like everything, all platforms and everything. But that means they shipped 2.46 million units, which is down now from what we're seeing, because it's an interesting thing to see because they're shipping less than we thought, but then they're selling more than we thought they would in things like Japan right now with the Famitsu, or we had Media Create, but Famitsu, and in the MPDs where they continue to sell the most. In fact, their first quarter, which was weird, in the MPDs is more than the PlayStation 4, Xbox One have ever been able to do, even in their peak years. So it's odd to see that. The only thing I can think of right now between the two, because their software was actually pretty good as well, that pretty much crushed their expectations. The only thing I can think of, and the thing that would explain the differences between what they report as what they've shipped to what's actually being sold in stores, is that stores in general, retail stores, had ordered more than they actually needed in the third quarter, so they had enough stock laying around, because when Nintendo ships to stores, that usually means that obviously stores need more stock, so they order more, and that's kind of where that would fall in line with, is the shipped numbers would come down to stock that's there. And if you remember, they had a massive third quarter, was huge, so there's a chance that people just over-ordered, or Nintendo had ended up basically shipping too many, and there weren't as many needed in the first quarter. That's the only thing we think of, but they actually missed their expectations, the revised expectations. Remember, it was like 20 million, then it got kicked all the way down to 17. They missed it by like 0.05 million, so they were at 16.95 million. They were very, very close, but they missed it by like that much. But their software, which is where they make a lot of their money, which is why their money is up from last year, actually crushed their expectations pretty well. They originally had 110 million for the software units that they would ship, and they actually ended up at 118.5. So they beat that by 8.5 million units when it comes to software. So that actually is why they still made more money than last year, despite missing their estimates here. So that's pretty much it there. But of course, software is where you make the money. So I have a feeling Nintendo's okay with it, but they definitely want to sell more this coming year because their lineup is better. There is, of course, like a rumored revision at some point in time in this fiscal year, a cheaper one, I guess, and cheaper hardware would of course help. And that makes sense why they are pushing it to 18 million for this fiscal year that they're currently in. And so they are pushing up 1 million from the 17 million that they revised. So they're looking to push that up more. And they also have a higher software forecast of 125 million from the 110 that they had this past fiscal year. So looking at the games, there's going to be some interesting ones here. It does look like Mario Kart is still like trucking along, like not even a little bit. It's like massively rolling along right now. Like it is not even like it's insane to think about how, I guess, just how well Mario Kart 8 Deluxe sells, considering it is a port of a Wii U game. But Mario Kart 8 Deluxe actually this past quarter sold 1.67 million more, and that's only behind Smash Bros. Ultimate, which is still fairly new, and it's barely behind Smash Bros. Ultimate, which was 1.73 million. I think Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is probably, I'm thinking, always just going to be like the best seller on the Switch, unless another Mario Kart game comes out and kind of pulls units away from that one. That'll probably always be at the top. That's 16.69 million units. That is pretty ridiculous. Other million sellers from this past quarter include, we already talked about Mario Kart, Smash Bros. Then we have Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. That was over 1 million as well this past quarter. Mario Party keeps selling. It's very interesting. That's over 6.4 million now. New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, which was a game that people did not like the price of, obviously, because it's basically the same game. 3.3 million, which is why they keep doing this with these ports, because they keep selling. It is ridiculous how much they sell. It's just, they're like unstoppable when it comes to these ports, despite people obviously not being super excited about them. Mario Odyssey actually sold 0.68 million, so it was just ahead of the 500,000 mark. Scrolling down here, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee is a weird one. It didn't sell the best over this past fiscal quarter, 0.63 million, which is weird because that was another holiday type game, right? And I figured it would have been a little more on, I guess, alongside Smash Bros. A bit more. Like, I figured this would have been at least 1 million, but I guess Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee is slowing down a bit. It's not as, I guess, people were thinking it would sell more going forward, and it really hasn't. Splatoon 2 is rolling up to that 10 million mark. It is going to hit it. Splatoon 2 will be a 10 million seller, which is massive for that franchise. I mean, it's only a second game in the franchise, so yeah, that's a big stuff there. Here's Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. There's Mario Party. Again, Mario Party is probably doing better than a lot of people were expecting. 1-2 Switch at 3 million. And then we have Mario Tennis Aces. Now, going into their actual pamphlets and everything, they told us information about other games, which is interesting. They did talk about Octopath Traveler. I think that's another one that's also slowed down a bit, as that's actually totaled at 1.17 million. I remember we heard it crossed 1 million at one point, but I don't believe that they're actually shipping. I don't think they're covering that in Japan, if I'm thinking right. So Nintendo probably doesn't have, because they just reported a 0 in their pamphlet and everything, which I assume means that it's because they're not publishing it in Japan. I guess that's Square. So they just have information for like overseas and everything. So maybe Octopath Traveler is coming up on that like 1.5 million mark. Interesting there. And then the Labo Variety Kit also crossed 1 million units. So Labo is doing all right as well. Now, looking at the side-by-side, Daniel Ahmed, great person to follow, by the way, if you're interested in this kind of stuff. He does a good job covering it. If you're curious about where the Switch is in accordance with other systems around it, we don't really know anything about the Xbox One. Unfortunately, Microsoft doesn't really tell us, so we can't, like, for example here, Daniel cannot track it. But the Switch and the PlayStation 4 are pretty much at the exact same spot now, in terms of how many months they've been on the marketplace. The Wii, by the way, is this big red mark. The Wii was unfair in its first 36 months. It wasn't fair. Eventually, of course, it started to kind of top off a bit, and that's why we expect the PlayStation 4 to eventually pass it, probably in 2019. But yes, the Switch and the PlayStation 4 are pretty much neck and neck at this exact same time. It's going to be more curious to see what happens going into the back half of this year, which is when we expect the Switch to really start pushing more, especially if a cheaper option, yes, I know, is introduced. But with the game lineup that they have is pretty strong. The PlayStation 4 had a bit of a bump there, so it's going to be up to the Switch to see if they can do that. Release dates, this is something that people will ask about. Did we get any new release dates, any new information on it? Kinda not. The only one that I'm a bit concerned about right now, and I shouldn't be, because I don't think it's that big of a deal to the point where Nintendo has to push it back, but Luigi's Mansion 3. was not actually mentioned by Nintendo when it came to kind of explaining their what they're looking to do this year. They mentioned Animal Crossing, Pokemon Sword and Shield, Zelda, and Fire Emblem, but they didn't really mention anything with Luigi's Mansion, which concerned me a bit. But it is still slated for 2019. We have wintertime 2019 for Sword and Shield. Of course, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, which is weird because we have a release date for that, but they just have it as summer. All right. But Astral Chain, Fire Emblem, these are all ready to roll pretty much. But Bayonetta 3 is also to be announced. Daemon X Machina, still summer 2019. That could get a release date dropped at any time on Twitter, though. We just saw it, of course, with Mario Maker 2. Bayonetta 3, though, still to be announced. That game is actually... I wonder if they told us about that game like when it was first going into development or something, because I am a little surprised that it is taking this long just to give us a year. I guess Bayonetta 3 is a 2020 game at this point. Metroid Prime 4 is going to be TBA on these things for a long time. We understand that. But Bayonetta 3 is one that I'm a bit surprised about there. But those are the basic sales numbers and everything for it. It was, I think it was less than what people were expecting, but the interesting thing about that for the fiscal year is that their money was higher than the previous one. So it seems like their software is rolling along really, really well. It is also interesting to look at this when you look at it next to the 3DS, which, real quick on the 3DS, they're only expecting to sell 1 million more of those this fiscal year that we're currently in. The 3DS is basically done this year. So there's that, but the Switch is rolling up to almost the halfway mark of the 3DS. So think about that as well. The software is basically already there. So the software on the Switch is going to be something else when it's all said and done. And that's basically what Nintendo aims for. But I could easily see the Switch eventually overtake the 3DS, which would mean that the Switch would probably end up in the probably 80 million mark before it's all done, I would assume at this point. But let me know what you guys think about this down below. There wasn't as much really happening as a lot of people were thinking when it comes to systems shipped and everything. But it was the first quarter. Usually companies don't rely too much on the first quarter as they do, obviously, at the holiday time. But Nintendo's set up pretty well for the summer. And then going into the fall and everything with Animal Crossing being a very big one that I think people are forgetting about. But let me know what you guys think down below. Make sure you like the video if you enjoyed it. Dislike it if not, and I'll see you in the next video.